Good morning and welcome to Lesson 2, where we are exploring representations. Today we're going to be considering Stuart Hall's ideas about representation, exploring both selection and stereotyping. Just to remind you, this is part of our current sequence of lessons where we're exploring representations as a key media concept, and in doing so looking at both news and recapping other case studies too. So today it's Friday, it should be a double lesson. So there's a video to explore Hall's theory and an extended writing activity linked to his theory too. Let's start with a quick recap though. I want to know 3 things that you can recall from last lesson. So number 1, which social groups does the caged mnemonic help us to remember? Can you list 3 common stereotypes in the media? And can you explain what the term constructed realism means? Pause the video and have a go at that task now. Okay, so hopefully you have written down here that the caged mnemonic help us to remember the social identities that are really dominant in representations. So they could be things like class, age, gender, ethnicity, and disability. Number 2, you could have picked from a range of common stereotypes linked to the caged mnemonic. For example, you might have identified that the middle classes are a dominant group and that the working classes may be stereotyped as uneducated. You might have identified that adults would be the dominant group and that children would be stereotyped as innocent and vulnerable. Or perhaps you've recognised that men are the dominant group and women would be stereotyped as nurturing and domesticated. You may have come up with some others, but those are just a few to help you recap. And number 3, the term constructed realism. This really does link to what we're going to be discussing with Hall's theory today. So remember, constructed realism was about the way in which media language was used to construct a media product. Therefore, those technical codes help to construct a version of the world that isn't real. It's a version of reality rather than the thing itself, and it's always constructed through choices made by the editor and the journalist. Okay, so let's have a look at Hall's theory. In order to do this, we need to really start with understanding the reflective school of thought. So, what does that suggest? Well, a reflective school of thought suggests that the media products that we see are able to reproduce the real world without distortion. Therefore, the media provides to us a window to the world, a faithful and accurate means of reproducing information. Stuart Hall, however, acknowledges that the media has what we call an imitative capacity, so it's able to imitate the real world. But he reminds us that media representations are more than just imitation. The way in which they are made up and constructed through media language is important. So media products are composed through selection and the ordering and placement of visual, aural, and linguistic elements. In Hall's theory, then, media products do not offer us accurate or objective reflections, but rather produce versions of reality that are shaped by the subjective viewpoints of their creators. So can you see how his theory completely fits with the ideas of constructed reality or constructed realism that we looked at in our last lesson? Okay, so let's explore some of the ideas that Hall suggests as evidence really of the way in which media language can be used to present versions of the world. So in a newspaper, for example, we might be seeing here a real world event, but it's the use of conventions. It's the use of a headline alongside the masthead and the images, the captions, all of these things that work together to present versions of the world to us. Now, we accept, because we've seen these newspapers lots of times, that this is just how newspapers work. It's how news events are conveyed to us. So it's become quite a powerful way in shaping how we view the world, because it's become accepted as a natural. Interestingly, television news also kind of conveys this idea. We know what the conventions of news are. They're designed to convey to us a sense of trustworthiness, that when we see these smartly dressed presenters sitting in their studio set, that they are presenting to us the real world. In fact, all of it is construction. The choice of background, the choice of lighting, the clothing that they wear, their positioning on the screen. But again, it's helping to shape the way in which we view those television news events. This also plays out in other forms of media. Let's look at film, for example. The use of a shot type, such as a high-angled shot, is going to convey to us that a character is weak and vulnerable, perhaps. We know that this is not natural, it's a man-made construction. But what it communicates to the audience has been learned over time. We don't need to be told what this kind of shot type reveals to us, because we're so used to seeing it in cinema that we've accepted it as real. The same with something as clever as the fourth wall break. This conveys to the audience a sense of authority, the protagonist breaking away from the scene that they're in to look directly or perhaps talk directly to an audience. This can be used for comic purposes. It can be used to undermine the narrative that's being told, again to give power to the protagonist. But it's become a conventional thing, so that we again accept that this is just part of the way that storytelling and films work. So Hall would call this a shared symbolic code, but audiences have largely internalised this symbolic code over time, that through their own media experiences and their own media consumption, they have understood the symbolic code that is presented to us through the media, whether it's in a newspaper cover, television news studio, or the types of shot types and cinematography that we would see in film. So he says that our ability to decode these images is not innate, we're not born with it, but it only comes as a result of repeated exposure to media products. In other words, the media both uses and shapes our understanding of the world. Okay, I know you've been making notes here and putting it onto your essential media theory sheet. So there is a box on there that will now allow you to kind of check your understanding of this so far. I want you to tell me which of the following statements accurately describe Hall's representation theory. Okay, just give a tick if it's true, and a cross if it's false. Okay, so you could pause the video at this point if you wish and have a go at applying the first stage of Hall's concept to a newspaper text. That is on an attached PDF document, and there are a range of different questions for you just to work through and answer to help you decode from Hall's perspective Okay, you may wish to leave this task until the very end of the lesson and complete the two writing activities in the second hour. That's completely up to you. Okay, let's look at concept 2. So Hall tells us then that media products do not just reflect reality. He says that their meanings are shaped by media producers, and then in turn, these versions of the world and versions of reality can have a really profound impact on audience thinking. So here he talks about the use of stereotypes, just as we did last lesson, but he talks about their power and the power that they have to shape the way in which we view the world. Okay, let's look at some of his ideas. So he says that stereotypes are really important for a number of reasons. He's particularly interested in the portrayal of black masculinity. Hall's theory begins by investigating newspaper reporting in the 1970s, particularly those that focused on black mugging stories. He concluded that media stereotyping during this period firmly linked black masculinity with crime, and that the media's reliance on such stereotypes then has had a really profound impact on the attitudes and viewpoints of wider society. So he says that stereotypes are important for these reasons. Number one, that media stereotypes reflect societal attitudes. Okay, so here he's saying that if we start studying the media, we can gain a sense of what the wider society thinks about the groups who are regularly stereotyped. So when he looked at black youth culture, he began to identify that stereotypes that associated black males with criminality just reflected anxieties about real crime. The journalists who reported black criminality were therefore reacting to the genuine fears of their audience at the time of writing and publishing the stories. So the stereotypes therefore can reflect societal attitudes and anxieties and fears. However, he also suggests that the media themselves contribute to the construction of a stereotype. So, for example, he says that black youths internalised the criminal stereotypes that we used in the 1970s. So, as a result, they engaged in real criminal activity themselves. The demonisation of black youths by newspapers also meant that white audiences became worried and reluctant to trust young black males. This then has a significant impact on people's employment prospects. And the impact and result of that might further encourage young black men to engage in criminal activities in order to survive. So he's showing here that the construction of a stereotype in the media then has a negative impact on people's real lives. Finally, he suggests that the power of stereotypes is that they can be reshaped and repurposed. He identified that media stereotypes can be guided towards positive representations of key groups. So, the changing nature of black representation within the news since the 1970s, he says, is a powerful testament to the idea that media stereotyping processes can change. They're fluid, they can be repurposed and reshaped into something more positive over time. Okay, so he goes a step further then to talk about the symbolic power of stereotypes. He says that these stereotypes can seek to be inclusive of one social group at the expense of another. So this power of stereotypes can help to present some social groups as outcasts social, what he calls othering, presenting them as somebody unlike us, different. And often with an othering, it enables us to view people as separate, perhaps even to be dehumanizing and unempathetic towards them. I've used the Daily Express as an example here. They have, quite rightly, been highly criticised for their stereotypes, negative stereotypes, and representation of particular social groups. In the 3 examples here, you can see that their negative stereotyping of migrants is symbolic of social power. It is a social othering and a presentation of migrants as outcasts. Okay, so what else does Hall say then? Well, he says that these stereotypes can be a means of social control. And he thinks this for 2 reasons. Firstly, he says that stereotypes can increase the visibility of key groups. So, by focusing on negative stereotypes, negative features, and reinforcing these ideas, he kind of highlights that some groups are undesirable, they are other, and this is communicated clearly to the rest of society. Furthermore, these stereotypes might infer that the negative traits being presented to us are natural. So, stereotypes might infer, for example, that black males are naturally lawless, or that dumb blondes will always lack intelligence. So the few ingredients that are used to construct the stereotype are just repeated so often by the media that they become interpreted by the audience as fixed or natural. Okay, so what do we need to know here? Well, in order to apply some of the theories of stereotyping to a whole range of texts on our course, it's useful to think about the why stereotypes are used by the media more generally. So we know that they are a shorthand, they're a universal kind of image that are quick and easily decoded by an audience. But why? Well, Hall would suggest that they help audiences to understand characters. So they provide to us that shortcut to decode a character in the media just through what they look like. So a villain in a film, for example, by their facial features, by their clothing, by their posture. So these are particularly helpful, is a helpful means of understanding images in the media quickly. Stereotypes may also be used then to help build character relatability. So they can induce audience empathy, sympathy, or perhaps even dislike, hatred quite quickly. They might signpost audiences, so we can get a general sense of the direction of the story, whether it's on a TV show or a news narrative, just by the stereotypes that are being presented. You'll be able to understand quite quickly what will happen to a certain character. Our princess is going to fall in love. The blonde is going to die in the horror movie first. Or that the action hero will triumph in the face of adversity. And finally, they can be used to reinforce genre expectations. These stock characters and archetypes. And they can increase the audience's viewing pleasure and enjoyment. We watch those genres that we like and we return to them. So it feeds into this our own expectations of what should feature in that kind of film. So stereotypes may not always be a negative thing in the media. However, there are things that we should be concerned about, suggests Hall. one of the things that he discusses as a concern is the way in which stereotypes can be used for closure and exclusion. So Hall argues that stereotypes really construct this idea of closure and exclusion, fixing in social boundaries and telling us what or who is socially acceptable. To return to his research, he says that criminalising stereotypes, for example, might exclude black males from the normal workings of society. And he goes a step further. He says that this creates power circulatory, that those groups with power will create the stereotype, whilst those who feel the impact of those stereotypes are trapped. They're caught in this impossible situation and unable to escape from this kind of low social position they've been placed in. So it's this constant cycle. Again, on your sheet, you have some multiple choice questions here. I'd like you to go through and mark which of the definitions given best explains Hall's concept of closure and exclusion, and which of the definitions best explains Hall's concept of power circulatory. You can pause the video and have a go at that now. Okay, so one of the best ways to really consider concept 2 of Hall's theory is to have a go at applying it. Have a look at the images on screen, have a look at the image that is on your worksheet too, and make some notes on these questions. To what extent do these images seem to suggest that all black males are dangerous? How does this work as a stereotype that is reinforcing some kind of social power? I want you to consider, do you think perhaps that black youth might internalise these media messages? So to what extent might the media be responsible for demonising black males and, in doing so, excluding them from wider society? Okay, so there are 2 tasks here for you to complete. There is the analysis task for concept 1, which I mentioned earlier in the video, and there is this task to consider concept 2. Can I ask you please to then send me a copy of both written tasks as well as your e-worksheet that you've been working on through this video, and have a think about any questions. Now you've looked at the theory so far, what do you understand of it? Are there any bits that really you want some more exemplars for and examples? And what questions arise for it? Please ask away, and I look forward to looking through your answers and giving you some feedback in our next lesson. Have a good day.